My wife's lover sat in my kitchen, wearing my robe, while my wife explained I needed to accept the new arrangement or leave with nothing. I smiled and started packing. What they'd learn in 72 hours: the house, cars, and accounts weren't community property, they were assets of my hobby. Business worth $10.30 million. You know that feeling when you walk into your own house and suddenly feel like you've stepped into some twisted episode of Trading Spouses that nobody told you you'd signed up for? Yeah, well, welcome to my Tuesday morning, folks. The name's Grayson Luo. I'm 35 years old, and I've just survived what feels like the longest red-eye flight in human history from Seattle back to what I foolishly still call home. My eyes are burning. My back's killing me from sleeping against an airplane window that apparently doubles as a medieval torture device, and all I want is to stumble into my kitchen, pour myself a decent cup of coffee, and pretend that the quarterly reports I've been staring at for the past 6 hours actually make sense. But life, as it turns out, has other plans. Because standing there in my kitchen, scratch that, sitting there like he owns the damn place, is some guy I've never seen before in my life. He's perched on one of my bar stools at the kitchen island like he's holding court, casually spooning what looks suspiciously like my favorite granola into his mouth. And here's the real kicker. He's wearing my bathrobe. My charcoal gray Turkish cotton bathrobe that cost me $200 and took 3 months to break in just right. This stranger is sitting in my kitchen, eating my breakfast, wearing my clothes, and acting like this is the most natural thing in the world. I'm standing there with my carry-on still slung over my shoulder. Keys dangling from my fingers like I'm some kind of confused door-to-door salesman who's wandered into the wrong house. When my wife Sabrina finally decides to acknowledge my existence, she doesn't jump up with relief that I'm home safe. She doesn't rush over to give me a hug or ask how the flight went. Hell, she doesn't even look embarrassed that there's a half-naked stranger eating cereal in our kitchen at 7 in the morning. Instead, she just stands there by the coffee maker, arms folded across her chest like she's about to deliver a PowerPoint presentation on quarterly earnings, and drops the bomb that I guess I should have seen coming, but somehow didn't. "There's a new arrangement, Gray," she says, and her voice has that cool, practiced tone she usually reserves for explaining to the contractor why the kitchen backsplash isn't quite the right shade of whatever pretentious color she picked out from some designer magazine. "You can accept it, stay quiet about it, and we can all coexist like civilized adults. Or you can leave, and you can take whatever personal belongings actually belong to you." The guy in my robe, Trent, as it turns out, because of course his name is Trent, doesn't even have the decency to look uncomfortable. He just keeps chewing my granola and watching me like I'm some kind of fascinating nature documentary. "Morning, sport," he says around a mouthful of what I'm pretty sure is the last of my organic blueberry clusters. "Hope you don't mind, but Sabrina said you wouldn't be back until later." I set my keys down on the counter with what I hope sounds like calm deliberation rather than the barely controlled shock that's currently running through my system like I've been tasered. I walk over to the coffee maker, stepping around Trent like he's a piece of furniture that someone's inexplicably moved into my kitchen, and pour myself a cup from the pot that Sabrina apparently made for her and her new boyfriend. The coffee's still warm, which means this little domestic scene has been going on for a while. Long enough for them to get comfortable. Long enough for Trent to raid my closet and make himself at home. "So," I say, taking a sip of coffee that tastes exactly like it always does, which is somehow the most surreal part of this entire morning. "How long has this new arrangement been in effect?" I'm proud of how normal my voice sounds, like I'm asking about the weather or whether anyone's seen the remote control. Inside, though, I'm doing calculations. Not emotional calculations. Those can wait. I'm doing practical calculations, the kind that involve asset distribution and legal precedents, and the very careful financial planning I've been doing for the past 2 years, while Sabrina's been busy building what she calls her lifestyle brand, and what I call an excuse to spend money we don't technically have. Sabrina looks surprised by my tone, like she was expecting me to start yelling, or maybe break down crying, or do whatever it is that husbands are supposed to do when they walk in on their wives' morning routine with another man. "Does it matter?" she asks, and there's a little edge creeping into her voice now, like she's annoyed that I'm not following the script she had in her head for this conversation. "What matters is that this is how things are now, and you need to decide whether you can handle that like an adult." Trent chuckles, actually chuckles. and pushes the bowl away from him like he's finished not just with breakfast, but with the entire pretense of treating me like a human being in my own house. "Look, buddy," he says, and I have to admire the sheer balls it takes to call me buddy while wearing my bathrobe. I know this is probably a shock and all, but Sabrina and I have been talking, and we think this could actually work out for everyone if you're willing to be reasonable about it. I nod slowly, like I'm actually considering the logistics of whatever bizarre polyamorous sitcom they think they're starring in. Reasonable, I repeat, tasting the word like it's a new kind of coffee blend. That's an interesting word choice. I take another sip and look around my kitchen, at the granite countertops I picked out, at the custom cabinet hardware I installed myself, at the stupid expensive espresso machine that Sabrina insisted we needed and then never learned how to use properly. "I'll start packing," I say finally, and the relief that washes over Sabrina's face is almost worth the price of admission to this whole ridiculous show. She actually smiles, like I've just agreed to some reasonable business proposal instead of walking away from 8 years of marriage and everything I thought I knew about my life. Trent grins and leans back in my bar stool like he's settling in for a long stay. "Smart man," he says. "I was hoping you'd see it that way." But here's the thing that neither of them knows. The thing that's keeping me calm while my wife rearranges my entire existence around some guy who probably thinks my expensive bathrobe came from Target. For the past 2 years, every single major purchase we've made has been funneled through my company, Luo Circular Systems. Every car payment, every mortgage payment, every piece of furniture, and every kitchen appliance. All of it officially belongs to what Sabrina likes to call my little hobby, the eco-packaging business that she spent the better part of our marriage mocking as a waste of time and money. Turns out my little hobby is about to become very, very relevant to both of their futures. And as I watch Trent adjust my bathrobe and Sabrina pour herself another cup of coffee like she's already planning how to redecorate once I'm gone, I take my first mental photograph of this moment. I want to remember exactly how confident they look right now, exactly how satisfied they are with their clever little arrangement. Because in 72 hours, when the legal paperwork starts flying and the asset seizures begin and they realize that the house they're sitting in doesn't actually belong to the happy couple, I want to remember the look on their faces when they thought they'd outsmarted me. I finish my coffee, rinse the mug in the sink like a polite house guest, and head upstairs to start packing. Behind me, I can hear them already talking about paint colors. This is going to be fun. Let me tell you a little story about how a hobby becomes worth $10 million while your wife is upstairs picking out throw pillows and complaining that you don't network enough at her Pilates instructor's wine nights. See, it all started about 7 years ago in the most glamorous location you can imagine, my garage. Yeah, I know, real Silicon Valley origin story material right there. While Sabrina was inside watching reality shows about people who flip houses for a living, I was out there with a folding table, a laptop that sounded like a dying vacuum cleaner, and an idea that everyone told me was either impossible or completely stupid. The idea was simple, which should have been my first clue that it was going to be anything but simple to execute. I wanted to create packaging that didn't just biodegrade. Hell, any cardboard can do that if you give it enough time and moisture. I wanted to create packaging that was truly circular, meaning every component could be broken down and reformed into new packaging indefinitely without losing quality or structural integrity. Think of it like the holy grail of the recycling world, except instead of granting eternal life, it would hopefully grant eternal usefulness to what we throw away. The first prototype looked like something a kindergartner might make during arts and crafts time if that kindergartner had access to industrial adhesives and a severe lack of adult supervision. It was lumpy, it smelled weird, and it fell apart if you looked at it wrong. But it worked, sort of, in the same way that a paper airplane technically works even if it immediately nosedives into the ground. I could break it down with a specific enzyme solution I'd developed, and then reform the resulting slurry into new packaging material that was almost as strong as the original. Almost being the key word there, because apparently almost as strong doesn't cut it when you're trying to convince suppliers to trust your weird garage science with their actual products. I spent about 6 months getting laughed out of meetings with guys who wore suits that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment and who looked at my prototypes like I was trying to sell them snake oil mixed with unicorn tears. Interesting concept, They'd say with the kind of smile you give to a small child who's just explained how they're going to become a dinosaur when they grow up. But we'll stick with what works. What worked, apparently, was continuing to pump out millions of tons of packaging that would outlive cockroaches and probably survive the heat death of the universe. But hey, at least it was cost-effective. Meanwhile, Sabrina was getting increasingly frustrated with what she called my garage phase. She'd come out there sometimes, usually when she was on the phone with one of her friends, and she'd gesture at my setup like it was some kind of elaborate man cave devoted to avoiding responsibility. "Gray's having his midlife crisis early," I'd hear her say, and she'd laugh like this was the most charming thing in the world instead of, her husband trying to solve an actual environmental problem while building a business. She liked the idea of having a creative husband in theory, the same way she liked the idea of organic vegetables and yoga retreats and all the other lifestyle accessories that looked good on her carefully curated social media presence. But she wanted creativity that came with immediate social status and preferably a regular income that she could mention at dinner parties. What she didn't want was a husband who smelled like industrial solvents and who kept weird chemicals in the refrigerator next to her overpriced organic kombucha. "This is cute and all," she told me one night while I was explaining how I'd figured out how to increase the structural integrity by adjusting the polymer chain length. "But when are you going to turn this into something real?" By something real, she meant something that would fund her increasing expensive taste in everything from skincare products to weekend getaways to places with names like the Serenity Wellness Collective that charged $300 for what was essentially a fancy nap. The funny thing is, I was turning it into something real, just not in the way she expected. See, while Sabrina was building her Instagram-worthy lifestyle, I was quietly building relationships with suppliers who were getting nervous about the changing regulatory landscape around packaging waste. Turns out that when governments start talking about carbon taxes and extended producer responsibility laws, suddenly that weird guy from the garage doesn't seem quite so crazy anymore. The breakthrough came when I finally got a meeting with a regional grocery chain that was facing some serious public relations problems over their packaging waste. They'd been getting hammered by environmental groups, their customers were starting to ask uncomfortable questions, and their sustainability coordinator was desperate enough to listen to anyone who claimed to have a solution. I walked into that meeting with prototypes that actually worked, cost projections that actually made sense, and a 3-phase implementation plan that would let them test the waters without betting their entire supply chain on my garage science. That first pilot program was small, just produce bags and deli containers for 3 stores in the Pacific Northwest. But it worked. Not only did it work better than anyone expected. Customer feedback was positive, the packaging performed exactly as advertised, and most importantly, the company could actually market their commitment to sustainability without sounding like they were just greenwashing their way through another quarterly earnings call. Word gets around fast in the grocery business, especially when you're talking about something that can help companies stay ahead of regulatory changes while potentially saving money in the long run. Within 6 months, I had meetings lined up with suppliers across the West Coast. Within a year, I had my first nationwide contract. And within 2 years, I had something that Sabrina still referred to as my little hobby, but that was generating enough revenue to fund our entire lifestyle and then some. But here's the thing that Sabrina never understood, the thing that she missed while she was busy networking with other wives who treated their husbands' careers like accessories to be coordinated with their handbags. I learned from watching my mother go through her divorce. I watched her discover that all the years she'd spent building what she thought was a shared life with my father had actually been years spent building his life, while her name was conveniently absent from most of the important paperwork. So, I did things differently. I had help from Dr. Sloan Mercer, my old materials science professor who'd gone into consulting and who knew more about corporate structure than anyone had a right to. She helped me design what she called a bulletproof setup where my personal assets and my corporate assets were kept as separate as possible while still being completely legal and above board. The house we lived in, purchased by Luo Circular Systems as a retreat property for executive use. The cars in our driveway, fleet vehicles leased through the company. Even the furniture and appliances that Sabrina picked out were technically corporate assets, purchased as part of creating an appropriate environment for business entertainment and client meetings. On paper, Sabrina and I owned almost nothing together except what went into our joint checking account. which was just enough to cover day-to-day expenses and her personal spending, but nothing that would qualify as real assets if things ever went sideways. And now, apparently, things were about to go very, very sideways. You want to know when I first realized my marriage was heading south faster than a GPS with a grudge? It wasn't when Sabrina started coming home late with stories that didn't quite add up, or when she suddenly developed an interest in personal growth workshops that seemed to require a lot of overnight stays in expensive hotels. No, the moment I knew we were screwed was when she joined Claudia Reyes's little circle of influence, which was basically like a country club for women who'd perfected the art of looking flawless while slowly destroying everything around them. Claudia Reyes was what you might charitably call a lifestyle guru, and what I would less charitably call a professional manipulator with an Instagram account and a talent for making other women feel inadequate about their perfectly fine lives. She ran these exclusive gatherings that she called elevation sessions, where a carefully selected group of women would get together to discuss things like intentional living and authentic self-expression, which apparently translated to how to completely reorganize your life around getting more attention on social media. Sabrina came home from her first elevation session buzzing with what she called clarity, but what sounded to me like a laundry list of everything that was supposedly wrong with our life together. My clothes were uninspired. My schedule was limiting her growth. My habit of working from home was preventing her from creating the kind of entertaining space she needed to build meaningful connections. Even my coffee-making routine became a problem. Apparently, the way I ground beans in the morning was somehow holding her back from becoming her best self. Tea first. I figured this was just another phase, like when she'd gotten really into that alkaline water thing, or when she decided we needed to reorganize our entire kitchen according to some feng shui principles she'd read about online. But this was different. This had the systematic thoroughness of someone who'd been given a blueprint for dismantling a marriage and was following it step by step. The complaints escalated gradually, which I'll give Claudia credit for. She clearly understood the importance of pacing when you're convincing someone to blow up their life. First, it was just suggestions about how I could elevate my presentation, which meant spending money we didn't need to spend on clothes I didn't want to wear to impress people I didn't like. Then it became observations about how my energy was affecting Sabrina's ability to step into her power, whatever the hell that was supposed to mean. But the real red flag wasn't the criticism, it was the secrecy. Sabrina had always been pretty open about her social life, partly because she genuinely enjoyed talking about the people she met, and partly because she liked having an audience for her stories about whatever drama was unfolding in her various social circles. Suddenly, though, her phone became off-limits territory. She started stepping outside to take calls, claiming they were just checking in with the girls, but speaking in the kind of hushed tones you usually reserve for planning surprise parties or federal crimes. The late nights started around the same time. Wellness workshops that ran until midnight. Strategy sessions for some undefined project that always seemed to require meeting at wine bars in the city. Sisterhood dinners that left her coming home smelling like expensive perfume and someone else's cigarettes. Even though Sabrina had quit smoking years ago and always complained when other people smoked around her, I'm not an idiot, despite what my current domestic situation might suggest. I could see the pattern forming, and I could have confronted her about it, demanded explanations, made scenes, done all the dramatic husband stuff that probably would have felt satisfying in the moment. But here's the thing about being married to someone who's getting advice from a professional life wrecker. Confrontation just gives them ammunition. It lets them paint you as controlling, paranoid, threatened by their growth. It hands them the narrative they need to justify whatever they're planning to do next. So instead of confronting, I started documenting. Not in a creepy, private investigator kind of way, but in a careful, methodical, this might be important later kind of way. I kept receipts for everything, partly because I'd always been meticulous about our finances anyway, but now with an extra layer of attention to timing and patterns. I noted when she left and when she came home. I paid attention to the charges on our credit cards, not to control her spending, but to understand where she was going and who she was going there with. I also started backing up her text messages, not reading them, mind you, because even I have some boundaries, but making sure they were preserved in case they became relevant later. I documented the wellness trips and the strategy sessions and all the other increasingly elaborate excuses for spending time away from home. I created what you might call an insurance policy, a comprehensive record of our marriage's slow-motion collapse that would protect me if things went the way I was increasingly sure they were going to go. And I did all of this while maintaining what Sabrina would later describe as my disturbing calm. I kept my tone warm when she criticized my clothes. I smiled and nodded when she explained why my work schedule was incompatible with her personal growth. I even wrote the checks for her elevation sessions and wellness workshops, because refusing to pay for the rope she was planning to hang me with would have just accelerated the timeline. The genius of my approach, if I do say so myself, was that I turned her own strategy against her. While she was busy building a case for why our marriage was holding her back, I was busy building a case for why our marriage had been a business partnership with very unequal contributions. While she was documenting my limitations for her elevation circle, I was documenting her financial dependence for my legal team. Because yeah, I had assembled a legal team. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet, but a small group of professionals who understood corporate structure and asset protection and who could help me navigate what was looking more and more like an inevitable separation. My CFO, Noor Haddad, who'd been handling the books for Luo Circular Systems since the early days and who understood better than anyone how our personal and corporate finances were structured. My legal counsel, Marisol Park, who specialized in business law but who also understood the intersection between corporate assets and domestic relations. And later, when it became clear that I was going to need someone who understood operations and logistics, Matteo Irizarry, who could make sure that any transition happened smoothly and according to proper procedures, that I called the whole thing Project Mariner. Partly because I liked the naval metaphor of navigating dangerous waters, and partly because I have a weakness for code names that make boring legal work sound like a spy thriller. The plan was simple. If Sabrina decided to blow up our marriage, I wanted to make sure that the explosion was controlled, that it happened on my timeline, and that when the smoke cleared, I'd still have something left to rebuild with. The plan was designed to execute in 72 hours if necessary. 72 hours to secure assets, file paperwork, establish legal precedents, and make sure that whatever new arrangement Sabrina had in mind would have to account for the reality of who actually owned what in our supposedly shared life. That I kept my tone warm and my ledger cold, and I waited. So here we are, back in my kitchen with Trent still wearing my bathrobe like he's auditioning for the role of world's most comfortable homewrecker. And Sabrina is standing there like she's about to present the quarterly results to a board of directors who are definitely not going to like what they're about to hear. The coffee I poured myself is getting cold, but I'm not really drinking it anyway. I'm just holding it because it gives my hands something to do while my brain processes the fact that my wife has apparently decided to restructure our marriage like it's a failing startup that needs new management. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. I say, setting my mug down on the counter with the kind of deliberate care you use when you're trying not to throw things. You want me to accept that Trent here is now part of our household arrangement, and in exchange for my cooperation, I get to continue living in my own house and sleeping in my own bed, assuming that bed isn't otherwise occupied. I gesture toward Trent, who's now leaning back in my bar stool like he's settling in to watch his favorite TV show. Is that about the size of it? Sabrina's face does this thing it always does when she thinks I'm being deliberately obtuse, which is to say it gets that pinched look around the eyes like she's trying to solve a math problem that's slightly too complicated for her skill level. Don't be reductive, Gray, she says, and I have to admire her ability to use corporate buzzwords even when she's essentially asking me to be okay with sharing my wife with a guy who apparently has no qualms about raiding my closet. This isn't about ownership or control or any of those outdated concepts. This is about evolving beyond traditional relationship structures and creating space for authentic connection. Trent nods along like she's just explained the theory of relativity in terms that finally make sense to him. Exactly, he says, and he's got this earnest expression on his face like he genuinely believes he's participating in some kind of revolutionary social experiment instead of just sleeping with someone else's wife. Sabrina and I have been exploring what it means to love without limitations, to create relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than legal contracts and social expectations. I have to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing, because apparently Trent is the kind of guy who can say love without limitations with a straight face while wearing another man's bathrobe and eating another man's breakfast. Love without limitations. I repeat, tasting the words like they're a new kind of wine that I'm not sure I like. That's beautiful, Trent. Really poetic. Did Claudia help you workshop that phrase, or did it come to you naturally? Sabrina's jaw tightens, which tells me I've hit closer to home than she'd like to admit. Claudia has nothing to do with this, she says, but her voice has that defensive edge that means Claudia has everything to do with this, and we all know it. This is about me finally being honest about what I need, about what we both need, instead of pretending that a relationship that stopped working years ago is somehow going to magically fix itself. Years ago, I say, and now I'm genuinely curious about her timeline. When exactly did our relationship stop working, in your professional opinion? Was it when I started the business, or when the business started succeeding, or when it became clear that my little hobby was going to be more than just a way to avoid dealing with my midlife crisis? Trent shifts uncomfortably, like he's starting to realize that this conversation is heading into territory that wasn't covered in whatever preparation sessions he and Sabrina had before I walked through the door. Look, man, he says, and he's trying for that reasonable, just guys talking tone that men use when they're about to say something that's definitely not reasonable. I know this is awkward, but it doesn't have to be adversarial. We're all adults here. We can figure out a way to make this work for everyone. Make this work for everyone. I echo, and I take another sip of coffee, even though it's definitely cold now and tastes like disappointment. That's an interesting phrase. What exactly would that look like in practical terms? Do we set up some kind of schedule? Alternate weekends? Color-coded calendars? Sabrina sighs like I'm being intentionally difficult instead of just trying to understand the logistics of whatever polyamorous fever dream she's apparently been planning. You're making this more complicated than it needs to be, she says. The house is big enough. We're all civilized people. There's no reason we can't coexist peacefully if everyone's willing to be mature about it. And that's when I ask the question that I've been building up to since I walked through the door, the question that's going to tell me exactly how much planning has gone into this little domestic revolution. Have you merged your finances already? I ask, and I keep my voice casual, like I'm asking about the weather or whether anyone's seen my reading glasses. The look that passes between Sabrina and Trent is worth the price of admission to this whole circus. It's the look of two people who've been so busy planning the emotional and physical logistics of their new arrangement that they haven't quite gotten around to thinking about the boring practical details, like who's going to pay for the groceries and the utility bills and the mortgage on the house where they're planning to play house. We will this week, Sabrina says finally, and there's something in her voice that tells me this is the first time she's actually said that out loud. The first time she's committed to a specific timeline for combining her life with Trent's in ways that go beyond just sharing a bed and my breakfast cereal. I nod slowly, like this makes perfect sense, like merging finances with someone you've apparently been seeing for however long you've been seeing him is just another item on the to-do list, right between destroy marriage and redecorate living room. That's smart, I say. Financial transparency is important in any relationship, traditional or otherwise. Trent looks relieved that I'm being so reasonable about their plans to restructure my entire existence around their emotional needs. I'm glad you see it that way, he says. I was worried this might get ugly, but you seem like you're handling this really well. Oh, I'm handling it great, I tell him, and I even manage to smile when I say it. In fact, I think this calls for a toast. I raise my coffee mug in a mock salute. To new arrangements and financial transparency and love without limitations. They both look pleased, like we've all just agreed on the terms of a business deal that's going to work out well for everyone involved. Sabrina actually smiles, the first genuine smile I've seen from her all morning. I'm going to need 72 hours to collect my things, I say, setting my mug down and pulling out my phone. Is that reasonable? Of course, Sabrina says, gracious in what she clearly thinks is her victory. Take all the time you need. I type 2 words into my phone and hit send. Mariner, go. The response comes back immediately, a lock emoji from Noor. Time to see how much they really know about love without limitations. The first 24 hours of what I'm privately calling Operation Reality Check unfold with the kind of precision that makes me genuinely proud of the team I've assembled over the years. While Sabrina and Trent are probably upstairs picking out his and hers towels and discussing paint swatches, I'm sitting in the passenger seat of Noor's Honda Civic at 6 in the morning, watching her work through a checklist that would make a NASA mission planner weep with joy. Temporary restraining orders filed at 8:15, she says, tapping her tablet with the stylus she insists is more efficient than using her finger, even though I've never been able to tell the difference. Marisol's got 3 judges she can reach out to if we need expedited hearings, but she thinks the paperwork is solid enough that we won't hit any speed bumps unless they try to get creative. Noor Haddad is what you might call a financial assassin disguised as someone's very organized aunt. She's been my CFO since the early days when Luo's circular systems consisted of me, a folding table, and a business plan written on the back of a napkin, and she has the kind of methodical approach to numbers that makes the IRS look sloppy by comparison. She's also got a master's degree in forensic accounting, which turns out to be surprisingly useful when you need to prove that your estranged wife has no legal claim to assets she's never actually owned. What about the personal accounts? I ask, because even though I trust Noor with my financial life, I like to understand exactly what's happening when my world is being systematically reorganized. Frozen as of midnight, she says with the satisfaction of someone who's just executed a particularly elegant chess move. Your personal stipend drops to 0 effective immediately. All payroll advances are suspended, and every internal financial document now carries a watermark that identifies it as proprietary corporate information. She shows me her tablet screen, where what used to be a simple expense report now looks like a classified government document. Anyone who tries to access, copy, or distribute these files without authorization is going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with our legal department. The beauty of the system we've built is that it's completely legitimate. Every step we're taking is documented, justified, and designed to protect corporate assets from unauthorized access or distribution. The fact that these corporate assets happen to include the house where my wife is currently playing newlyweds with her boyfriend is just a happy coincidence that speaks to the importance of proper business planning. My phone buzzes with a text from Matteo Irizarry, our operations lead, who's apparently been up since 5 a.m. pulling audit logs and documentation. Asset provenance chain complete, the message reads. Every major purchase traced back to corporate authorization. Board minutes, purchase orders, insurance filings, it's all buttoned up. Matteo is the kind of guy who gets genuinely excited about organizational charts and proper documentation procedures, which makes him either the most boring person in the world or exactly the kind of person you want on your team when you need to prove that your business has been run according to proper corporate governance standards. Today, I'm going with the latter interpretation. Where are we staying tonight? I ask Noor, because while I'm enjoying the strategic aspects of this operation, I'm also running on about 3 hours of sleep, and I'm going to need somewhere to crash that doesn't involve listening to Sabrina and Trent celebrating their new domestic arrangement. Booked you a room at the Marriott downtown, she says, but you're not staying there. Rafi's bringing takeout to the warehouse office around 7, and we've set up a temporary workspace in the conference room. Better to stay mobile until we see how they react to the first wave of paperwork. Rafi Banner has been my oldest friend since college, back when we were both engineering students who thought we were going to change the world with our brilliant ideas about sustainable technology and our complete ignorance of how business actually works. He's also got the kind of irreverent sense of humor that makes even the most stressful situations feel manageable, which is exactly what I need right now. While I'm getting a crash course in corporate asset protection from Noor, Marisol Park is apparently having a very different kind of morning. According to the updates she's sending to our group chat, she's been on the phone since dawn with various government offices, filing the kind of paperwork that creates legal facts out of what used to be business arrangements. Unauthorized removal of corporate assets is now officially prohibited by court order, reads her most recent message. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or substantially alter property owned by Luo's circular systems without proper board authorization will result in immediate legal action. The genius of this approach is that we're not doing anything vindictive or punitive. We're just enforcing the corporate governance standards that have been in place all along. The house has always been corporate property. The cars have always been fleet vehicles. The furniture and appliances have always been corporate assets purchased for business purposes. We're just making sure that everyone involved understands these facts clearly, and that any future decisions about these assets go through proper channels. Meanwhile, according to the security system notifications I'm getting on my phone, Sabrina and Trent are having what appears to be a very relaxed morning. The motion sensors show them moving around the house like they own the place, which I suppose they think they do. The kitchen camera catches Trent making coffee in my machine, and I have to admit there's something satisfying about knowing that every cup he drinks is being funded by corporate assets that he has no legal claim to. Around noon, I get a text from Sabrina that makes me genuinely laugh out loud. Gray, the house insurance company, called asking about policy holder verification. Can you call them back? I show the message to Noor, who grins like someone who's just won a particularly satisfying hand of poker. Corporate policy, she says. Insured through the business, managed by the business, claims handled by the business. She's not on the policy because she's not an employee or board member. I text back, corporate matter. Noor will handle it. The response comes back immediately. What do you mean corporate matter? I don't respond, because there's something beautiful about letting people discover the implications of your planning in real time. Besides, I'm getting reports from Jia Kapoor, our operations analyst, about vendor notices that are going out to everyone from the lawn service to the grocery delivery company, politely informing them that Ms. Quinn is not authorized to make changes to any accounts or authorize any charges to BY evening. When Rafi shows up at the warehouse with Thai food and his usual collection of terrible jokes about corporate restructuring, I'm feeling something I haven't felt in months. Optimistic. Not because my marriage is over. That ship sailed the moment I walked into my kitchen and found Trent wearing my bathrobe, but because for the first time in years, I'm not the one reacting to someone else's plan. So, Rafi says, unpacking pad thai and spring rolls while I boot up my laptop. How long do you think it'll take them to figure out that they're living in a house they don't own? Give it another day, I tell him. Tomorrow's when the real fun starts. Day 2 starts with what has to be the most polite home invasion in the history of domestic disputes. At exactly 9 a.m., a moving truck pulls up to my house. Excuse me, to the corporate retreat property currently being occupied by my estranged wife and her bathrobe-wearing boyfriend. And 3 guys in matching uniforms start unloading dollies and moving blankets like they're preparing to relocate a small government office that I'm there to supervise, naturally. Because someone needs to make sure that only the appropriate items are being relocated, and that someone might as well be me. I've got my clipboard, my inventory list, and my most professional, just doing my job expression as I direct the movers toward the garage, where my actual work equipment has been patiently waiting for this moment. Trent comes outside first, still wearing my bathrobe because apparently he's decided to make that his signature look. And he's got this confused expression like he's trying to solve a word puzzle that's slightly too advanced for his skill level. What's going on out here? He asks, and I have to give him credit for maintaining that casual, I belong here tone, even though he's clearly starting to realize that maybe he doesn't understand the situation as well as he thought he did. Just collecting some work equipment, I tell him, gesturing toward the movers who are carefully loading my label printer onto a dolly. Company property, you understand. Can't leave corporate assets sitting around unattended. The label printer is followed by my laser cutter, my heat press, my industrial scale, and about 6 boxes of prototype materials that probably look like the contents of a mad scientist garage sale to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking at. Trent watches this parade of equipment like he's trying to figure out whether this is normal or whether he should be concerned, and I can practically see the wheels turning in his head as he processes the fact that what he probably assumed was a hobby workshop is being treated like actual business infrastructure. Toys, he says finally, like he's trying to convince himself more than me. Lot of toys for a grown man. I smile, the kind of smile you give to someone who's just revealed that they don't understand the difference between a toy and a tool. Yeah, I say. Expensive toys. Sabrina emerges from the house looking like she's dressed for a photo shoot about successful women having casual mornings, which is to say she's wearing the kind of outfit that's supposed to look effortless, but probably took 45 minutes to put together. She surveys the moving operation with the expression of someone who's starting to suspect that the game she thought she was playing might have more rules than she realized. Gray, what is this? She asks, and there's an edge in her voice that suggests she's beginning to understand that my agreeable response yesterday might not have been quite as simple as she thought. Corporate asset recovery, I tell her, consulting my clipboard like I'm reading from a script. Luo Circular Systems needs to consolidate its equipment and materials for an upcoming audit. Standard business procedure. The beautiful thing about having spent 2 years building a legitimate business with proper documentation is that everything I'm saying is technically true. We do have an audit coming up. I scheduled it myself yesterday morning. We do need to consolidate our assets. It's just good business practice. And everything we're moving is genuinely corporate property that has no business sitting in someone's garage indefinitely. While the movers are loading the last of my equipment, Gia Kapoor arrives with what she cheerfully calls the documentation package, which is a 3-inch binder that looks like it could be used as a weapon in a pinch. She's got the kind of methodical approach to paperwork that makes the DMV look efficient, and she's been up since dawn preparing what she calls asset provenance documentation for every major item in the house. Ms. Quinn, she says with the professional courtesy of someone who's about to deliver news that no one wants to hear. I have some documents here that clarify the ownership status of various items on this property. Would you like to review them now, or would you prefer to have your attorney present? Sabrina looks at Gia like she's speaking a foreign language, which in a way she is, the foreign language of proper business documentation and legal precedent that most people never have to deal with until it becomes suddenly, urgently relevant to their lives. What kind of documents? Sabrina asks, and I can hear the first hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice. Gia opens the binder with the reverence of someone unveiling a work of art. Purchase agreements, insurance documentation, board minutes authorizing major expenditures, lease agreements for vehicles, and corporate tax filings showing depreciation schedules for business assets, she says, and she flips through the pages like she's giving a tour of a museum. Everything that clarifies which items are corporate property and which items are personal property. Trent peers over Sabrina's shoulder at the documentation, and I watch his face go through several interesting expressions as he realizes that the house he's been treating like his new bachelor pad is actually a corporate retreat property owned by a business that neither he nor Sabrina has any legal connection to. This is about the house, he says, and it's not a question. Among other things, Gia confirms cheerfully. The residence, the vehicles, most of the furniture and appliances, the art collection, even the espresso machine. All corporate assets purchased for business purposes and properly documented as such. Sabrina takes the binder with the careful movements of someone who's handling something that might explode. She flips through a few pages, and I can see her trying to process the implications of what she's looking at. Gray, she says finally, and her voice has lost that confident edge from yesterday morning. We need to talk. Of course, I tell her. My attorney will be in touch to schedule a convenient time for all parties. That's when Claudia Reyes pulls up in her white BMW, because apparently this morning needed one more layer of comedy. She gets out of her car like she's making an entrance at a charity gala, all flowing scarves and designer sunglasses, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having had to deal with actual consequences for anything. Sabrina, darling, she calls out, completely ignoring the moving truck and the boxes of corporate assets and the general atmosphere of a life being systematically reorganized. I brought those color swatches for the kitchen redesign we discussed. I offer to pour her a cup of coffee from the corporate espresso machine, because I'm nothing if not hospitable to guests on corporate property. She declines with the kind of dismissive wave you give to service staff, which tells me everything I need to know about how she views my role in whatever renovation fantasies she and Sabrina have been cooking up. Actually, I tell her, you might want to hold off on those kitchen plans for a bit. Property management decisions need to go through the corporate board now. The look of confusion on Claudia's face is almost worth the price of admission to this whole circus. She glances around at the moving operation, at Gia's binder full of documentation, at Sabrina's increasingly pale complexion, and I can practically see her trying to figure out how the script for this morning got changed without anyone telling her. I text Nor, stage 2. Her response is immediate. Vendor notices going out now. Time to see how they handle the next wave of reality. You know what's beautiful about process servers? They show up exactly when they're supposed to. They don't care about your personal drama, and they have zero interest in hearing explanations about why maybe this isn't a convenient time for legal documents. At exactly 9:12 a.m. on day 3 of what I've started thinking of as the Great Domestic Restructuring, There's a knock on the front door that has the kind of official authority that makes everyone within earshot suddenly very interested in what's about to happen. I'm parked across the street in Noor's Honda, drinking coffee from a thermos and watching the whole thing unfold like it's the season finale of my favorite TV show. Sabrina answers the door in her yoga pants and that confused morning expression that people get when they're expecting the UPS guy, but instead get someone in a cheap suit, holding a leather portfolio that clearly contains documents no one wants to receive. "Miss Quinn? Mr. Alder?" the process server says, and his voice carries that perfect blend of professionalism and complete indifference to whatever chaos he's about to unleash. "I have some documents for you." He hands over 2 thick envelopes, the kind that government offices use when they want to make sure you understand that whatever's inside is serious business that requires your immediate attention. Sabrina takes hers like she's handling a live snake, while Trent just stares at his like he's trying to figure out whether opening it will somehow make the situation worse. Notice to vacate corporate premises. The process server continues in that same matter-of-fact tone. Cease and desist regarding unauthorized use of corporate assets and divorce filing. You've been served. And that's when Marisol Park steps out from behind the process server like she's been waiting in the wings for her cue. She's wearing her best courtroom suit and carrying her briefcase like it contains the secrets of the universe. And she has that expression that lawyers get when they're about to explain why you're completely and thoroughly screwed. "Ms. Quinn, Mr. Alder," she says with the kind of professional courtesy that somehow manages to sound more threatening than any amount of yelling could. "I'm Marisol Park, counsel for Luo Circular Systems. Per the filings on public record, this residence is owned by Luo Circular Systems, LLC, and is designated as executive retreat housing for business purposes. You are currently guests at will, and that arrangement is being terminated effective immediately." Sabrina looks like someone who's just discovered that what she thought was a friendly game of poker was actually a professional tournament with stakes she can't afford. "This is ridiculous," she says, but her voice has that shaky quality that means she's starting to understand that maybe it's not ridiculous at all. "This is community property. We've been married for 8 years. Marisol opens her briefcase with the precise movements of someone who's done this dance before and knows exactly which documents need to come out in which order. "Actually," she says, extracting a folder that's thick enough to use as a doorstop, "community property law applies to marital assets, not to corporate assets that are owned by a legally separate business entity." She spreads the documents out on the porch like she's dealing cards, and I can see from across the street that she's got everything we've been preparing for the past 2 years. Purchase agreements showing the house was bought by Luo Circular Systems, insurance documentation listing the company as the policyholder, board minutes approving the purchase as a business investment, tax filings showing depreciation schedules for corporate real estate. "Corporate entity," Trent repeats, like he's trying out a foreign phrase that he doesn't quite understand. "What corporate entity?" Marisol looks at him with the patience of someone explaining basic math to a particularly slow student. "Luo Circular Systems, LLC, she says. "Mr. Luo's eco-packaging company, which currently employs 12 people, holds patents on 3 manufacturing processes and generated approximately $10.3 million in revenue last fiscal year." The number hits them like a physical blow. Sabrina actually takes a step backward, and Trent's face goes through several interesting color changes as he processes the fact that the hobby he's been dismissing for the past 2 days is apparently worth more money than he's likely to see in his entire lifetime. "10 million, Sabrina says, and her voice is barely above a whisper. 10.3, Marisol corrects helpfully. According to the most recent third-party valuation, which was completed last month by Morrison and Associates for insurance purposes. Trent tries to rally, because apparently he's the kind of guy who doubles down when he's losing. "Okay, fine, but there has to be some kind of community property claim," he says. "They were married when he built this company. She must have some kind of ownership stake." Marisol gives him the kind of smile that defense attorneys probably practice in the mirror. "That's an interesting theory," she says. "Unfortunately, corporate law doesn't work that way. Ms. Quinn is not listed as a founder, officer, board member, or shareholder of Luo Circular Systems. She has never been employed by the company, never contributed capital, and never participated in management decisions. Her only connection to the corporate assets is that she was granted permission to reside in corporate housing as part of her marriage to the majority shareholder. She pulls out another document, and I can see even from across the street that it's covered in official-looking stamps and signatures. Marriage certificate aside, she continues, there's no legal basis for claiming ownership of assets that were acquired, developed, and maintained through a separate corporate entity that predates the marriage and operates independently of any marital relationship. Sabrina looks like she's trying to solve a math problem that keeps changing every time she thinks she's got the answer. But I live here, she says, and there's something almost desperate in her voice. This is my home. Corporate housing, Marisol corrects gently, which you've been permitted to use at the discretion of the property owner. That discretion is being withdrawn. Trent goes for the reasonable guys talking business approach, which tells me he still doesn't understand how far outside his depth he's gotten. Look, this seems like something we could work out through negotiation, he says. Maybe we could arrange some kind of reasonable timeline, discuss compensation for improvements, figure out a solution that works for everyone. Marisol gives him the look that experienced attorneys reserve for people who think they can negotiate their way out of gravity. Mr. Alder, she says, I'm going to suggest that you direct any further communications through your own legal counsel. As of this moment, your trespassing on corporate property and continued presence here could result in additional legal complications that I'm sure you'd prefer to avoid. She closes her briefcase with the finality of someone who's just concluded a successful business meeting. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises, she says. After that, we'll be working with local law enforcement to ensure compliance with the court orders. As she walks back to her car, I can see Sabrina and Trent standing on the porch like two people who've just been told that the ground they're standing on doesn't actually exist. They're holding their legal documents and staring at each other with the expressions of people who are beginning to understand that maybe they didn't think this whole thing through quite as thoroughly as they thought they had. I finish my coffee and text Marisol. How'd they take it? Her response comes back immediately. About as well as expected. See you at the office in an hour. Wouldn't miss it. I reply, time for phase 2. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, we're all sitting around my dining room table like we're about to negotiate a hostile corporate takeover, which I suppose in a way we are. The difference is that usually in hostile takeovers, both sides come prepared with actual leverage, whereas Sabrina and Trent have shown up with what appears to be a combination of wounded indignation and the kind of confidence that comes from fundamentally misunderstanding your position. That Sabrina's brought her own attorney, a guy named Richard Steinberg who specializes in family law and who clearly thought he was walking into a standard divorce proceeding where the biggest challenge would be figuring out how to split up the furniture in the 401k. Instead, he's sitting across from Marisol with a legal pad that's mostly blank and the expression of someone who's beginning to realize he might be outgunned. Trent, meanwhile, has decided to represent himself, which tells me everything I need to know about his understanding of the legal system and his assessment of his own intellectual capabilities. He's got a yellow legal pad too, and he's been taking notes like he's attending a particularly challenging college lecture, which in a way I suppose he is. I slide a single sheet of paper across the table, and I have to admit there's something deeply satisfying about the way their faces change as they read it. It's the executive summary from our most recent third-party valuation, the one that Morrison and Associates completed last month when we were updating our insurance coverage. The number at the bottom is printed in bold, $10.3 million. That's the current fair market value of Luo Circular Systems. I explain, like I'm presenting quarterly results to a board of directors who already know the company is performing well. Based on revenue projections, intellectual property portfolio, manufacturing capacity, and existing contracts with major retailers. Sabrina stares at the paper like it's written in a language she doesn't recognize. $10 million, she says, and her voice has that hollow quality that people get when they're trying to process information that doesn't fit with their understanding of reality. 10.3. I correct, because precision matters when you're discussing the systematic dismantling of someone's assumptions about their financial future. The valuation was conservative, according to Morrison. They think we could see 15 to 20 million within 3 years if the regulatory environment continues to favor sustainable packaging solutions. Steinberg clears his throat like he's about to object to something. Even though we're not in a courtroom, and there's nothing to object to except the uncomfortable reality of documented facts. Mr. Luo, he says, while these numbers are certainly impressive, the question of marital property division is more complicated than just corporate valuation. Nor, who's been sitting quietly with her laptop open and several thick folders arranged in front of her like she's prepared to fight a war with spreadsheets, finally speaks up. Actually, she says with the cheerful precision of someone who genuinely enjoys explaining financial concepts to people who don't want to hear them, it's not complicated at all. She opens her laptop and turns it around so everyone can see the screen, which displays what looks like a corporate organizational chart crossed with a family tree. Luo Circular Systems is a limited liability company organized under Delaware state law. She begins, and she's got that patient tone that accountants use when they're explaining why your brilliant tax avoidance scheme won't work. Mr. Luo is the majority shareholder with controlling interest. The company has 12 employees, maintains facilities in 3 states, and operates independently of any personal relationships or marital arrangements. She clicks to the next slide, which shows a timeline of major corporate milestones overlaid with personal relationship events. The company was founded 2 years before Mr. Luo's marriage to Ms. Quinn, she continues. All major assets were acquired through corporate funding. All intellectual property was developed using corporate resources, and all business relationships were established and maintained through corporate channels. Trent's been scribbling notes like he's trying to find some kind of loophole in basic corporate law. But she's been married to him for 8 years, he says, like marriage somehow grants automatic ownership rights to whatever your spouse happens to be doing with their time. Doesn't that count for something? Marisol gives him the kind of smile that criminal defense attorneys probably use when explaining plea bargains to clients who still think they're going to beat the charges. Marriage creates community property rights, she says, but only for assets that are actually part of the marital community. Corporate assets that are properly segregated and maintained according to legal business structures remain corporate assets. She opens one of her binders and pulls out a document that's covered in official seals and signatures. MS. Quinn has never been an employee, officer, board member, or shareholder of Luo Circular Systems, she says, running her finger down a list that apparently catalogs all the ways that Sabrina is not legally connected to my business. She has never contributed capital, never participated in management decisions, and never been involved in business operations. Steinberg tries a different approach, which tells me he's starting to understand that the frontal assault isn't going to work. What about spousal support based on the lifestyle that was established during the marriage? He asks. Surely there's an argument for maintenance based on the standard of living that was supported by corporate income. Nor clicks to another slide that shows 2 parallel columns of numbers, and I can see Sabrina's face go pale as she realizes what she's looking at. Mr. Luo's personal income from the corporation is documented here, Nor says, pointing to the left column, which shows a modest salary that's appropriate for someone managing a small business. Corporate distributions, when they occur, are based on business performance and are separate from personal compensation. The right column shows what Sabrina has been spending over the past 2 years, and the numbers tell a story that's probably not what she was hoping to hear. Ms. Quinn's personal expenses, Nor continues, have been funded through the joint marital account, which receives a predictable monthly transfer from Mr. Luo's personal income. She turns the laptop back around and pulls out a thick folder that's labeled Marital Assets Inventory, which brings us to what actually constitutes marital property subject to division, she says, and she opens the folder with the kind of ceremony that people use when they're about to deliver news that no one wants to hear. The inventory is disturbingly short. Sabrina's personal checking account, which contains about $3,000. A modest 401k from her previous job, which she stopped contributing to years ago. Some jewelry that might be worth a few $1,000s if you could find someone willing to pay retail prices for used luxury accessories. And the joint checking account, which currently contains just enough money to cover household expenses for about 2 weeks. That's it, Sabrina asks, and her voice is barely above a whisper. That's it, Marisol confirms. Everything else, the house, the cars, the furniture, the art, even the espresso machine, is corporate property that has no connection to the marital estate. I pour myself a glass of water from the pitcher that someone thoughtfully placed on the table, and I notice that my hand is completely steady. After 2 years of planning for this moment, after months of watching Sabrina build whatever fantasy she'd constructed about our shared future, it's almost anticlimactic to see it all reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet and legal precedents in a binder. Sabrina's hand shakes when she reaches for her own glass. The ice cubes make tiny clinking sounds that seem unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet room. "I need some air," she says finally. Through the window, I can see her standing on the porch, staring at nothing in particular while her phone buzzes with calls she's not answering. The beautiful thing about consequences is how they tend to arrive all at once, like a perfectly choreographed disaster where every moving part hits its mark exactly when it's supposed to. By 6 o'clock that evening, Trent's phone starts buzzing with the kind of insistent frequency that usually means someone's about to have a very bad day at work. He steps outside to take the call, and through the window I can see him pacing around my front yard. Excuse me, the corporate property's front yard, making the kind of hand gestures that people make when they're trying to explain why something that looks really bad isn't actually as bad as it looks. Turns out it's worse than it looks. "Compliance department," he says when he comes back inside, and his face has gone that particular shade of pale that people get when they realize their professional life is about to become much more complicated than they'd planned. "They want to see me first thing tomorrow morning about some kind of conflict of interest disclosure that I apparently should have filed, but didn't." Marisol doesn't even look up from her legal pad when she responds. Dating a married woman while advising her on financial matters that could affect your own living situation probably qualifies as a personal conflict that should have been reported to your firm's ethics board, she says with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. Most financial advisory firms take that kind of thing pretty seriously. The call had apparently been from Trent's supervisor, who'd received some very detailed documentation about Trent's recent living arrangements and his failure to disclose potential conflicts of interest when providing advice to clients whose personal situations might affect his own financial well-being. Someone, and I have no idea who, had apparently taken the time to compile a comprehensive report on Trent's recent activities and submit it to his firm's compliance department along with what sounded like a very thorough analysis of relevant ethical guidelines. Sabrina's having her own communication problems, though hers are more about the sudden and complete silence from people who used to return her calls immediately. Claudia Reyes, the lifestyle guru who'd been so enthusiastic about kitchen renovations and new arrangements just a few days ago, has apparently developed a case of selective amnesia when it comes to remembering Sabrina's phone number. Her texts are going unanswered, her calls are going straight to voicemail, and her carefully curated social media posts are getting the kind of polite non-engagement that people use when they want to distance themselves from someone without making it obvious. The other members of Claudia's elevation circle are following suit with the kind of coordinated abandonment that suggests they've all received the same memo about maintaining appropriate social distance from complicated situations. These are women who built their entire social identity around surrounding themselves with success and aspiration, and apparently discovering that one of their members has just been revealed to have less actual wealth than a typical community college student makes them nervous about their own carefully maintained images to Mrs. Donnelly, my elderly neighbor who's been watching this whole drama unfold from her front porch like it's her personal entertainment system, doesn't even try to hide her satisfaction when she sees Sabrina loading suitcases into a rideshare vehicle. "Told you that boy was quiet for a reason," she calls out. And there's something deeply satisfying about the way her voice carries across the neighborhood. Mrs. Donnelly has been living next door for 30 years, and she has the kind of radar for relationship dynamics that comes from decades of watching people's lives play out in driveways and front yards. The rideshare takes Sabrina to Trent's apartment, which turns out to be a studio in one of those buildings that markets itself as urban living for young professionals, but which actually means expensive shoebox with pretensions. Apparently, the plan had been for Trent to give up his lease and move into what they'd assumed would be their shared house. But corporate asset seizure has a way of disrupting even the best-laid domestic plans. 2 days later, when it becomes clear that Trent's studio apartment isn't quite large enough for two people who are both dealing with the kind of stress that comes from having your entire life plan collapse in the space of 72 hours, Sabrina moves again. This time it's to her sister Myra's sofa, which represents the kind of lifestyle downgrade that's probably difficult to explain to the elevation circle, assuming any of them were still taking her calls. Rafi drives by the house on Thursday evening, honks his horn once in what I choose to interpret as a victory salute, and for the first time in 3 days, I actually exhale completely. There's something deeply satisfying about sitting in my own living room, in my own house, drinking coffee from my own espresso machine, without having to worry about whose bathrobe is hanging in my bathroom or whose breakfast plans are disrupting my morning routine. The first conference with Sabrina's divorce attorney goes about as well as you'd expect, when one side comes prepared with binders full of documentation and the other side comes prepared with righteous indignation and a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate law. Judge Martinez, who apparently handles enough of these cases to recognize the difference between legitimate marital property disputes and fishing expeditions, schemes through our asset documentation with the speed of someone who's seen this particular movie before. "Counsel," she says to Steinberg after about 10 minutes of reviewing our paperwork, "your client appears to have confused brand recognition with actual ownership. The court sees no basis for claiming marital property rights to assets that are clearly held by a separate corporate entity. She orders immediate vacation of the property and non-interference with corporate assets, which is legal language for get out and don't touch anything on your way out. She also notes that any future attempts to claim ownership of clearly documented corporate property could result in sanctions, which is legal language for don't waste the court's time with this nonsense again. Trent's firm places him on administrative leave pending a full review of his client relationships and disclosure practices, which is corporate language for we're going to figure out how much trouble you've gotten us into before we decide whether to fire you quietly or fire you loudly." His supervisor apparently wasn't impressed with Trent's explanation that he'd been providing informal advice rather than formal financial planning services, especially since informal advice that affects your own living situation still qualifies as a conflict of interest under most professional ethics codes. That be why the end of the week, my house is silent again except for the sound of my prototype equipment humming in what used to be the master bedroom and is now my expanded workshop space. I roll my latest packaging design, a closed-loop fiber tray that might finally solve the foam container problem that's been plaguing the deli industry, into the bedroom and start sketching improvements. The irony isn't lost on me that the room where Sabrina used to complain about my work schedule is now the room where that work is going to continue expanding, probably into markets and applications that she never bothered to understand when she had the chance. My phone buzzes with a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail and keep sketching. Whatever it is can wait until I finish solving this particular engineering problem. Some arrangements are more permanent than others. 6 months later, I'm sitting in the exact same spot where Trent used to hold court in my bathrobe, except now I'm sketching designs for a revolutionary closed-loop fiber packaging system that could potentially replace every piece of styrofoam in every deli case in America. The irony of this location isn't lost on me. The kitchen island where my wife's boyfriend once ate my breakfast while wearing my clothes is now my primary workspace for building something that could change an entire industry. The divorce paperwork came through with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that makes you appreciate living in a society where legal processes actually work, even if they take forever. Clean, quick, and mind-numbingly boring, which is exactly how I wanted it. No drama, no contested hearings, no angry depositions where people yell at each other about who deserves what. Just signatures and filing fees, and the kind of procedural tedium that transforms life-changing events into paperwork. Sabrina received her share of what the court determined was legitimate marital property, which turned out to be roughly equivalent to what most people spend on a decent used car. Her personal checking account, the remnants of her 401k, some jewelry that appraised for less than she'd hoped, and half of the joint checking account, which wasn't much since I'd always kept our shared expenses modest. The total came to just under $15,000, which is probably not what she was expecting when she decided to restructure our marriage around her new lifestyle goals. The house is mine, officially and completely, along with the cars, the furniture, the art collection that Sabrina spent years curating, and most importantly, the peace of mind that comes from knowing exactly who owns what. No more wondering whether my business decisions need to be filtered through someone else's financial priorities. No more calculating whether corporate investments will affect domestic harmony. No more pretending that building something meaningful is somehow less important than maintaining appearances at dinner parties I never wanted to attend in the first place, that I've started making bread on Sundays. Partly because I enjoy the process and partly because Mrs. Donnelly mentioned that she misses the smell of home baking since her husband died last year. Every Sunday evening, I walk across the yard with a fresh loaf, and we sit on her porch talking about neighborhood gossip and the state of the world. Last week, she asked me to fix her porch light, which had been flickering for months, and I spent an hour rewiring her fixture while she told me stories about the previous owners of my house and their various domestic dramas. "Your arrangement seems to be working out better than theirs did," she said while I was tightening the wire nuts, and there was something deeply satisfying about being known in the neighborhood as the guy whose arrangement actually works. The business keeps growing in ways that surprise even me. We hired 2 apprentices from the local community college, kids who are studying environmental science and sustainable technology and who look at our prototype equipment like it's the key to solving the world's packaging problems. Maybe it is. They ask questions that push me to think differently about applications I hadn't considered, and their enthusiasm reminds me why I started this whole thing in the first place. I also established a scholarship in my mother's name at the community college, funding tuition for students who want to study sustainable technology but can't afford the full cost of their education. The first recipient is a single mother who's going back to school after working retail for 15 years, and she sends me progress reports every semester like I'm a proud relative. In a way, I suppose I am. We're all part of this weird extended family of people who think technology should solve problems instead of creating them. The prototype I'm working on tonight could be the breakthrough we've been building toward for years. It's a fiber-based container that's strong enough to hold hot soup, waterproof enough to handle salad dressing, and completely biodegradable in standard composting conditions. More importantly, it can be manufactured using existing equipment with minimal modifications, which means adoption could happen quickly once we prove the economics work. My phone buzzes with a call from an unknown number, the same unknown number that's been calling every few weeks for the past 2 months. I let it go to voicemail like I always do, because whatever Sabrina wants to discuss at this point probably isn't worth the disruption to my evening routine. The voicemail will be polite and carefully neutral, asking if we can catch up or have a conversation about moving forward. And I'll delete it without responding like I've deleted all the others. Some conversations don't need to happen. Some bridges are supposed to stay burned. I pour myself another cup of coffee from the machine that Sabrina always claimed was too complicated, but which I've finally learned to use properly, and I go back to my sketches. The fiber alignment in the container walls needs to be precise if we want the structural integrity to hold up under stress, and I think I've figured out how to achieve that consistency during the molding process. Outside, the neighborhood is settling into its evening rhythm. Mrs. Donnelly's porch light, the one I fixed last week, is casting a warm circle of light across her front yard. The couple 2 houses down is walking their dog, the same route they take every night at the same time. The teenager across the street is practicing skateboard tricks in his driveway, the sound of wheels on concrete creating a steady percussion that's somehow soothing rather than annoying. This is what I was building toward all along, even when I didn't know it. Not just the business success or the financial security, though those are nice. Not just the satisfaction of solving technical problems or creating something that might actually make the world a little bit better, though that matters too. What I was really building toward was this: the quiet satisfaction of sitting in my own house, working on something I care about, surrounded by a life that makes sense and fits together without requiring constant negotiation or compromise. The sun is setting through the kitchen window, painting everything in that golden light that makes ordinary moments feel significant. I roll my latest prototype design across the island where Trent once sat in my bathrobe, and I think about Sabrina's words from that morning 6 months ago: accept the new arrangement. I did accept it, just not the way she thought I would. My arrangement involves discipline and paperwork, and the kind of quiet power that comes from understanding exactly where you stand and what you own. It involves a business worth $10.3 million that exists because I chose to build something meaningful instead of just maintaining appearances. It involves apprentices who are excited about changing the world and neighbors who know they can count on me to fix their porch lights and scholarship recipients who send thank you notes that I keep in a file labeled "Reasons This Matters." Most importantly, my arrangement involves the freedom to sit in my own kitchen on a Sunday evening, working on problems that actually interest me, without having to wonder who's going to walk through the door wearing my clothes and eating my breakfast. That I think I'm going to like this arrangement just fine.